Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on older adult abuse and neglect. I'm Jennifer Owen. I have a degree in human and social development from the University of Victoria, and I'm a licensed practical nurse. For the last several years, I've been privileged to work with seniors in our community. And I'd like to start with just giving you an outline of what we will cover in this presentation. We'll start with the territorial acknowledgement. We'll move to talk about some definitions of abuse. We'll talk about the causes of abuse. We'll look at some statistical information, and we'll look at some community resources. I'd also like to talk about some self-care. Talking about abuse is a difficult topic. It can be triggering for some people. It can bring up unwelcome memories. So I want to encourage you to take the time for some self-care. Use whatever coping and calming things work best for you. If you need to leave the room for a time or leave the presentation, please feel welcome to do so. We'll move to our territorial acknowledgement. It is with much respect to the Lekwungen, Senchothan speaking peoples of the Wasanich, Esquimalt, and Songhees nations, on whose traditional territories the Victoria Women's Transition House Society is located. We make this acknowledgement with the expressed shared hope to live in communities free of intimate partner violence. And we'll move to some definitions of abuse and ageism. Abuse can be seen as the deliberate mistreatment of an adult, which causes physical, mental, or emotional harm or damage to their property or assets. There are different types of abuse. It can happen to anyone at any age, in any culture, no matter what their gender, income, or religion. Ageism can be defined as prejudice and stereotypes put on people strictly on the basis of their age. It predisposes individuals to avoid older people or to see them unrealistically, to negate their individuality, their humanity, their rights and needs. We'll talk about types of abuse. Physical abuse is physical force resulting in physical injury or pain or impairment to a vulnerable elder. It can also include inappropriate use of drugs, and it can include force feeding. Emotional abuse is the infliction of pain or distress through verbal or non-verbal means. For example, insults, restricting an elder's access to family, friends, community, recreational activities, treating an elder like an infant, infantilizing, negating their humanity. Sexual abuse can be non-consensual sexual contact of any kind with a vulnerable elder. It can also include innuendos or sexually suggestive gestures or language. With financial exploitation, this is illegal or improper use of a vulnerable elder's property, funds, or assets. Examples would be forging an elder's signature, cashing checks without permission, stealing possessions or property. Neglect is refusal or failure of those responsible for the elder to provide the necessities of life, such as food, water, or shelter. And here is a note about self-neglect. According to the National Center on Elder Abuse, self-neglect is one of the most frequently reported issues brought to adult protective services. Because of its frequency and damaging consequences, some elder abuse definitions include self-neglect or the failure of caretakers and others to take reasonable steps to prevent it. However, since self-neglect does not involve a third party, it's often intentionally excluded from definitions of abuse. Another type of abuse is abandonment, the desertion of a vulnerable elder by the person who has assumed responsibility for the elder. And we can move to causes of abuse. Why does abuse happen? At the bottom of abuse, all the time, all people, is a desire for power and control over another person or circumstances. There is a cycle of family violence. Some families have lived with abusive and controlling relationships for generations. For many people, this is a behavioral norm which they've learned and which they can perpetuate in their own lives. Caregiver stress is often under-recognized in our society. Caring for a vulnerable or impaired person is stressful and exhausting and frustrating. Many people who are in that position perhaps don't realize the impact on themselves, and we encourage caregivers who are experiencing stress and exhaustion to reach out for help and support because it is there. Social isolation makes a vulnerable elder more at risk for abuse. Dependence of the elder on a caregiver. There's a lack of awareness in society about abuse in general, and particularly about abuse of older adults. And there's ageism. We talked before about stereotypes and prejudice against people who are older, not seeing them fully as human beings and not recognizing their rights, their feelings, and their needs. Here we can see a diagram. We call this the cycle of abuse. This is another tool that we use at Transition House to help people better understand their situation. Abuse often happens on a continuum where things are peaceful and calm. Then there's increasing stress and tension, which rises to the point where there's an abusive incident. It can include single or multiple types of abuse. Often this is followed by what we call the reconciliation or honeymoon period. There can be apologies, promises of no more incidents of that type, affection, attention, and then a period of calm again, and rising tension, and another incident of abuse. Research has shown that this can happen on a continuum of severity, where the interval between the periods of abuse shortens, and the relationship just moves from tension to incident, tension to incident. There are signs of abuse to which we can all be alert, and there are patterns. So signs of physical abuse could include unexplained injuries, signs of restraint. Bruising on the upper arms can be an indication of possible violence or restraint. If there are weapons in the house, that's a cause for alarm. Behavior indications. Behavior of the senior themselves. Is the senior fearful, withdrawn, depressed, or isolated? Is the caregiver reluctant to leave the senior alone with professionals or other family members? There is a continuum of severity. There are different levels and types of harm. And the severity of abuse can increase from indignities to neglect of the senior, increasing to physical assault. It can lead all the way to life-threatening injury and, sadly, sometimes mortality. Abuse tends to escalate in terms of its frequency and severity. This can begin with being treated like an object, rough handling. It can move to emotional abuse, threats, insults, intimidation. It can increase to assault and neglect, and again to very serious life-threatening injury. And here's a pie chart. It's breaking down the percentages of the perpetrators of elder abuse. So we can notice that 40% of abusers of older people are adult children. 50% are in a spousal relationship. 9% are grandchildren, and 6% are siblings. So these are all family members. Most abuse occurs in the family environment. Here are some statistics from our province, British Columbia. We know that 8% of seniors have been financially abused. That means 1 in 12 seniors in our province. 50% of physical abuse of seniors occurs in spousal relationships, and in many cases, the violence has been of long standing. Here at Transition, we often meet women who may have been in a long-term marriage, perhaps 60 years, and they have not realized the relationship is an abusive one, and they have not realized that they do have options and support in the community. This is the power and control wheel. People, and often women, are not aware that they are in abusive relationships with their partners or family members. So we use this tool, we call it the power and control wheel, to help us work with survivors of abuse to understand and validate their experiences of abuse and neglect. And we can see that abusive people can and often do use many forms or tactics to cause harm, but always at the center of it is a desire for power and control over other people and relationships. So looking at the wheel, we can see that some things found there are using coercion and threats, using intimidation, using emotional abuse, isolation, dominance over the other person, and economic abuse. Seniors sometimes have a deteriorating health condition or disability, and those seniors may be less able to ask for help or give information about crimes against them or the situation they're in. If the senior is dependent on others for their sustenance, for their care, they may fear retribution if they report the abuse or neglect. Serious seniors with disabilities and impairment are more likely to be victims of crime because they're more likely to be helpless in the situation. Seniors with an intellectual disability, dementia, may be less able to recognize the danger, less able to protect themselves, escape, or seek help. And financial abuse, which can be defined as using a senior's assets for personal benefit without permission and or knowledge. This can include misuse of power of attorney, removing money from a joint account without permission, persuading a person to take money from an account for someone else's benefit, forcing a person to add their name to a house title or other legal documents, and fraud, scams, and identity theft. I think we're all becoming much more aware of scams out there in the community targeted at seniors. These are some factors in a continuum of financial abuse. A belief that seniors don't need money or they don't have a future. And again, that's related to stereotypes and ageism, not seeing the senior as a full human being. Theft of cash, credit cards, bank cards, personal mail. Cashing in RRSPs without permission. Using a bank card to withdraw cash from a bank machine, often in large sums, without the senior's knowledge. Unpaid loans or repeated borrowing, using trickery or persuasion to get a senior's money or possessions. Taking or withholding a senior's pension or insurance monies. Borrowing or taking a senior's possessions without permission. Selling the senior's property or possessions without permission. forcing the senior to change the will or give the person power of attorney. Misuse of power of attorney, refusing to pay the senior's bills, rent, or mortgage, forging a senior's name, establishing a joint account, and using the senior's money without that senior's knowledge or permission. Thefts from accounts from a financial institution. Believing that a senior's assets, money, or property should belong to the children, should belong to a family member. Forcing a senior to sign over a car or house, other assets, and leaving the person destitute. Misuse of powers of attorney and misuse of joint bank accounts are one of the main reasons that financial abuse occurs. There is in our province financial and legal protection. There is a public guardian and trustee in British Columbia. This body investigates when an adult is incapable of managing affairs and is at risk of abuse. The public trustee and guardian can manage a person's affairs when no one is assigned to do so, and they can investigate abuse of power of attorney. Seniors can protect themselves by, when capable, appointing an enduring power of attorney for finances and appointing a legal representative for healthcare through what is called a representation agreement to make sure that the senior's wishes are known in advance and to be very wary of joint accounts. People, and especially seniors, can encounter barriers to seeking help. We must acknowledge how difficult asking for help is and how vulnerable it makes us all feel. However, as we've come to see through research on shame, it's been shown to be the best measure of courage. It's our ability to be vulnerable. When you're ready, there are many community and government supports. Please ask for help. Reach out and seek help. Let's look at some of the barriers to seeking help. Personal barriers can be shame, feeling there's no one to tell, feeling unable to ask for help, feeling intimidated, feeling dependent on the abuser for care or support, worry about what might happen to you if that person is removed from your life, fear of the unknown, fear of the justice system, loss of the relationship, perhaps loss of contact with a beloved son or daughter. People can be fearful of reporting, fearful that no one will believe them, fearful of being blamed, fearful of retaliation from the abuser, fearful that they would be forced to move. And moving and relocating is known to be especially stressful for people in their senior years. Fearful of the consequences to the abuser or other people, or being frightened of not being able to manage if support is withdrawn, thinking, what will happen to me if that person is not there to look after me? There are social and political barriers, racism and discrimination. There is ageism and classism. There is lack of knowledge of official Canadian systems and laws. This can be especially the case for people who are new Canadians. And services may be in English only, or they may be culturally inappropriate. We'd like to give you a list of some community supports where people can seek out in our community. There's the Island Health Authority. There is the Seniors Abuse and Information Line. There's Victim Link. There is the Public Guardian and Trustee, as mentioned above. There is the NIDAS, Personal Planning Resource Center and Registry. There's the BC Crisis Line that has the Senior Distress Line. And we'll talk a bit about the BC Adult Guardianship Act. In this province, we have legislation that protects vulnerable seniors and adults from abuse and neglect. Seniors are always presumed capable of making their own decision unless proven otherwise by examination. Health authorities have been designated to investigate abuse of seniors who are not able to protect themselves due to health conditions and impairment. Reports of systemic or organizational abuse, neglect, or mistreatment are covered under the Act. Health authorities will not be involved if the senior is considered capable of making decisions or seeking help on their own. But there is a gap for people experiencing abuse due to coercion or abuse of power. It's a gray area. And in closing, we'd just like to tell you about some services and programs at Victoria Women's Transition House. We do have the Older Women's Program. We have a 24-hour crisis line. We have our safe shelter, and we have safe homes. We have support and education groups. We have outreach support. And we have a 23-unit housing building for women between the ages of 45 and 64. And we just encourage you to reach out, check in with us first and find out about our capacity. Don't hesitate to call us about any of our services. We'd be very happy to talk to you at any time. Thank you for your time and your attention for this presentation.